Hi, Donna.
There, I joined with audio. Good morning.
Hi,
Good
Jim.
morning.
I can hear you.
That is a good thing for this class.
Yes. It helps to be heard. It helps to be heard. Hi, guys. How are you?
Good.
Very
How are
good,
you?
thanks.
Excellent. So glad you could join in.
So glad you decided to do this.
Oh, great. I'm going to do a quick check of how I do screen share. Oops, I don't want to do that. So there we go. Donna, I assume you were able to pick up a handout.
I did. Went over yesterday and there were several waiting for me.
Great. So does this show full screen my first slide, Bible and Archaeology?
Yep,
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to go up here.
Oops.
Are we still here?
Yep.
We're still here.
Yeah, Zoom kind of glitched on me momentarily. Wasn't responding. So are we back to Zoom view?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was weird how my I tried to end the screen share and it wasn't really happy about that. I don't know why. All right. Well, it is 9 o'clock. I think I'm expecting Ellen to join us. Share time. So I'm going to give her a minute to get on downstairs. And how do I'm confused about how I switch back and forth between my screens.
Well, we can see your screen now.
Yeah, I'm sharing the,
Yeah.
okay. Oh. Yeah, because of the glitch, my control window came over here, so that's weird. Okay. All right. And Dee, are you using the handouts electronically or did you print them?
I printed them out.
Great.
Yep, I have my little booklet.
That's backwards. Let me turn the video around so you can actually mirror my video off. There we go. So now you can read the title on the handout, right?
Yep, sure
Okay.
can.
Better than being backwards. All right. Oh, there she is. Just coming up.
Hi, Ellen.
Hey, hi.
Hi, Al.
Now we can hear you.
Oops, and not that. All right, more. Let's see, where's my little, huh. Yeah. There we go. Hi.
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 We
All
have
right.
smiling faces this morning. I love it.
Mornings are my best time. I don't
Ah,
smile as much in the evening. I get tired.
yeah, I'm more productive in the morning than the afternoons, that's for sure. And in the evenings, we enjoy dinner together and we tend to watch TV. So, and fall asleep.
Yeah.
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 Dee looks like you're at home in Willow Springs.
Yes, I am.
Good. You feeling well?
Great.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good.
Great.
Good. Mm.
All right. Well, I think this is our quorum here.
Great.
And as we're starting this morning, I'm thinking back a bit to Guy's recent message on light. Jesus is the light of the world.
Mhm.
So join me in an opening prayer, if you would. Lord, we are grateful that you have been with us, you are with us, that you are the light to our world. Lord, may we not be people living in darkness. May we live in the light. And may that light be clear to us in the your existence and the evidence for that witnesses to these events in the Bible. Lord, open our eyes to this light. Lord, we are thankful for your light and for this season of hope here in this country. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right, guys. I am going to jump right in and share my screen. Wow, this is weird. Where did my...
Don't like to hear that.
sorry, just a moment. It looks like my PowerPoint disappeared, which I had open. Ellen, I had a little glitch when Zoom had a little glitch while you were still coming on, and my turns out my PowerPoint file closed, which I'm just now discovering.
Yeah.
Not good news.
Little glitches.
Okay, but it's back.
Yay.
And then I
Oh.
have to get to, oh, here's the swingers joining us.
Oh,
I'll pause for a moment.
these are Heather Platt's parents.
Oh,
Oh.
Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning.
Hello, Mike.
How
Or
are
is
you,
it-
Jim? Ellen?
Very
Hi.
good. We can hear you, Mike, but we can't see you. But hearing works fine.
Well, we do want to see you.
I'd like to see. Well, we can see you.
Mike
Oh.
Swinger is near Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And Debbie.
Yeah. We actually right now are in Florida. We're
Oh,
down
you
by
are?
Fort, yeah,
Good
by
morning,
Fort
Debbie.
Myers. and we just got done playing pickleball.
Ah,
And
good for you.
Mike was on a team against another friend and I, and he beat us.
Uh-oh.
I wonder if we go out and come back in
Yeah,
again.
we'll leave and come back in and make ourselves visible.
Okay, sounds good. All right, we'll hang here for a couple more minutes. Well, that's
All right.
fun.
Hmm.
I've invited Mike because about a year ago, he had sent me as a gift, a reference book, a handbook on Bible archaeology, which has been very useful in preparing this class. And it dawned on me, oh, I should invite him to class. And they took me up on it.
Yeah. Hi. There
We
they
can
are.
see you.
Hello.
We do
Yay.
exist.
Oh, there we are.
Not just a computer generated voice.
Look at her in her sleeveless.
Oh,
Her sleeveless.
oh yes, yes, and shorts.
And shorts.
Yeah.
All right. I'll try not to be jealous.
Outstanding.
It's 40 here, so.
That's
Well,
not
I'm
bad.
impressed. Out playing pickleball before class. Good for you.
There we go.
All right. Well, Mike and Debbie, we are just launching, just ready to launch here. So let me share my screen like this. And that should show the first slide. Yes. The Bible and archaeology.
Yeah.
See it.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'll jump right into it here, and feel free to leave your microphones on. You don't have to mute, and feel free to interject with a question anytime. We're just a small group, and that's really fun because we can take question and answer and have some conversation as we go. So let me start with a real fundamental question. What is archaeology? Let's describe it. So the basic definition of archaeology is that it is the study of past human life and culture by examination of physical remains. So that's really the focus. What physical objects do we have left over from the past? It could be thousands of years ago, biblical times, or the past could be decades ago. On the radio last year, I heard a description of facilities at Cape Canaveral that were used for the first manned rocket launches of the Mercury program. Well, those facilities had been long abandoned and were going to be torn down. So they sent in archaeologists to document what was there. Well,
Wow.
these are facilities from the 1960s.
Our lifetime.
Right. Yeah, I feel a little old, obviously, when I say that. But
Yeah.
so archaeology is any physical remain of human activity in the past. It's a field and discipline of science, and it's usually within the broader academic field of anthropology, the study of humans. And for this talk today, we're going to focus on the early 19th century. In fact, it was in the decade of the 1820s that archaeologists began making discoveries in the Near East that directly related to people, places, and events in the Bible. And that's where it gets interesting for us. So where are these places? Here's a quick map. I think you guys all recognize this map of the of the Near East with the Mediterranean Sea on one side, Persian Gulf on the lower right. Here's my pointer. So the locations where archaeological artifacts have been found, of course, are ancient Egypt along the Nile River, some things out of present-day Turkey, also called Anatolia in earlier times. The land of Israel is labeled Canaan on this map, Lebanon to the north, Syria to the northeast. And of course, we have this very rich archaeological area, perhaps the cradle of human civilization, in this area called Mesopotamia. And it's defined by the Tigris River, running right here down to the Persian Gulf, and its neighbor, the Euphrates River, right here. And perhaps you also know that the word Mesopotamia means meso, between, tamia, rivers. So this is the area between the rivers. I like this map because the green color denotes the areas where agriculture was possible. And you have this fertile crescent, it's called, from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Nile River, this continuous band of areas where you can grow food very productively. We're going to talk about artifacts from Assyria. This is the northern part of Mesopotamia, cities like Assur and Nineveh and some others that are not on this map. Here's the city of Babylon. We're going to talk about that. And then the Persian Empire is also important. And the Persians came from Iran, modern day Iran, to the east of Mesopotamia and invaded from the east. So we'll talk about that as well. So this is kind of the general map where these artifacts are going to come from. I also wanted to talk, whoops, I wanted one slide, but I got two. So let's go back here. I also wanted to talk, since I'm introducing archaeology, it began in the decade of the 1820s. So this timeline of 2 centuries, basically 1800 to 2000, I'm showing the dates of discovery for the artifacts in this handout, which I think you all have, and at least electronic copy.
All right. Yep.
Good, thanks, Mike. Glad to hear you have it. And in my handout, the earliest discovery date is the 1830, or the year 1830. That's this leftmost arrow. So far, the earliest date for any artifact related to the Bible is about 1825. So the artifacts in my handout kind of really do cover this period during which artifacts have been discovered, beginning in the early 1830s and right up, I mean, this last half of the 20th century, this is my lifetime. So there are discoveries being made, including in the 1990s, this rightmost arrow, and on into the 21st century. I just don't have any of those in my handout. Currently, there are something more than 100 ancient artifacts recognized as having relevance to the Bible. Some of these artifacts address specific events or places or persons named in the Bible. Other artifacts illuminate, let's say, the background or the general historical context of biblical times. And so basically in my handout, we're looking at, or I have focused on about 20 of these artifacts. So this is not a comprehensive thing like the book that Mike gave me, but it gives you a pretty good overview of what we know from biblical archaeology today. And I hope you'll find this handout useful. So that's dates of discovery, and that kind of places on the timeline where archaeology is actually happening these last 200 years. A second timeline I want to look at is this one. And in fact, this is the last page in your handout. This is page 28. So you have this. This timeline, for those of you who took my class in November, is the 2,000-year timeline from Abraham to the time of Christ. And on this page, I have overlaid dates of origin. So for the 20-some artifacts in my handout, I've put each one the date of origin on this timeline, and I've noted the page numbers. So this first arrow, that's the Treaty of Aleppo, that's on page 4. So as you use this handout, you can go to page 28, and you can kind of place on the biblical timeline when this artifact occurred, when it was created.
Oh, yeah, mute.
Mute. Oh, it's going away now.
That's,
And Mike and Debbie, you're probably seeing this timeline for the first time. So hopefully you'll find that helpful. Does this timeline make sense to everybody?
Mhm.
All right.
Yep.
So that was kind of fun. I just figured out I could do this a couple of weeks ago and added it to my handout. It's kind of fun to see how each artifact intersects with the Old Testament history. All right. The next thing I want to talk about to give us a sense of biblical archaeology is this idea of fractions. And this comes from Professor Edwin Yamachi. He was a professor of history at the University of Miami, now retired. And he made, I think, a really important set of observations about the nature of archaeology and its limits. And we need to be, being aware of these limits is really helpful. And so his observations were that archaeology comes with these 5 fractions. The first one is that only a fraction of the evidence survives in the ground from any past human event. Now, in archaeology, we often find whole cities, you know, the remains of cities. And of course, in the past, we have historical events like battles, or we have people individually. And whereas an ancient city leaves behind substantial remains, if you have a fortified city with a massive wall all around it, it's pretty likely some remains of that wall are still there because it's just so much, it's so big and so heavy, it just doesn't get moved. But the remains of an individual human life, there may be very little. That's one of the reasons that graves are a really important type of archaeological artifact, because in a burial, we're taking not only human remains, but usually artifacts related to that person and purposely burying them in the ground. And sometimes that's the only evidence that survives from a person's life, like a pharaoh of Egypt or whatever. So only a fraction of all the evidence of the past survives buried in the ground. His number 2 fraction is that only a fraction of all those possible sites with buried artifacts have been detected. That's interesting to think about. What are all the places in the world that there are fascinating evidences of the past that are buried and we just haven't found them yet? That's pretty cool. But we have to be realistic. We've only found some of those sites. The third fraction is that of all the sites we've identified and detected, only a fraction of those have been excavated and really thoroughly explored. The fourth fraction, only a fraction of what has been excavated and taken out of the ground has been thoroughly examined and published. So in the world of science, when you have a set of artifacts from an archaeological dig, it may be months and years to evaluate and study those artifacts, define with any confidence what they are, put that into a scientific paper, get it reviewed and vetted, as it were, by the scientific community. And in the process of publication, that says that it's been accepted as credible work in the field of archaeology. So step 4 is a very time-consuming process, and only a fraction of what's been excavated, discovered out of the ground has gone through this process of being examined and published. And then the 5th fraction is very important to us. Only a fraction of all that's been examined and published contributes to biblical studies. There's archaeology going on all over the world, but it's really only in the ancient Near East, in some specific sites, that we find there are findings pertinent to biblical history. Any thoughts on this? Any questions? Does this make sense to everybody? Cool. Yamachi's observations here are really helpful to temper our expectations. We do get valuable results, valuable information from archaeology, but we shouldn't expect comprehensive information, comprehensive set of data. We shouldn't expect compelling proof. We just get a really interesting set of evidence, and that's good to know. The next thing I'd like to explore about archaeology is that it's when something has been found, it's incumbent on us as Christians to ask 2 key questions. Does a specific artifact that's been found, does it contradict, refute, or disprove in any way what the Bible has to say? That's the negative question. The positive question is, does this artifact confirm something that's recorded in the Bible? So to be honest explorers of the past, we have to take both of these questions and take them seriously. And one of the cool things I discovered as I've looked at archaeology over the past couple of years is this set of answers to these 2 questions. This man is Nelson Glueck, a very prominent archaeologist of the 20th century. He's an American, he's a Jewish rabbi, and he was president of a Jewish college or university in New York. In his 1959 book, Rivers in the Desert, I just found out this morning, this is waiting for me at the library on library loan. First time I've actually looked at the book. In this book, Nelson Glueck answers those 2 questions very directly. And let's look at his answers. First, on the negative question. First bullet, it may be stated categorically that no archaeological discovery has ever controverted, that means disproven, a biblical reference. Now that's pretty cool. When an individual with his credentials, his vast experience in Israel doing field work, he can say there's not a single discovery that disproves something in the Bible. That's pretty cool. Very cool. The second bullet addresses the other question, and he says scores. So I've already told you there's about 100, that's 5 score. Scores of archaeological findings have been made which confirm in clear outline or exact detail historical statements in the Bible. Well, this is also pretty cool. I didn't expect to hear such a statement with the clarity that Nelson Glueck gives us, but I think this is a really powerful witness to what archaeology tells us about the Bible. In fact, if there's one idea you should take away from this class, I hope it will be this slide. And I have quoted Glueck in the preface in my handout. That's page 2 of the handout. So I've quoted this, you have those words. And frankly, if you take away one idea, I hope it's this. People are looking at their handouts and checking it out. All right. There's no questions. I'm going to move ahead. We're about halfway through our hour together. I'd like to expand then on the idea of what was the context in which archaeology arose, and specifically biblical archaeology, because I have found this to be instructive. And to do that, I'm going to look at 3 centuries, 17th, 18th, and the 19th century. And this is going to be a whirlwind tour. So I've already noted that biblical archaeology begins in the 1820s. That's about right here. But for context, I'm going to briefly touch on the 17th century. This is the century of Galileo and his telescope. This is the century of Sir Isaac Newton and his theory of gravity. In the future, I'm hoping to offer a separate class about this century and what I call the rise of modern science, or modern science coming into full bloom. In particular, the formative influence of Christian thought was pivotal to this full bloom of science. But that's for another time. For today, let's focus a little bit more on the 18th century. Excuse me. One of the descriptions of the 18th century, it's called the Age of Enlightenment. What does that mean? It was a philosophical movement of that century that is still very influential in our day. And it's interesting to me that our Pastor Guy just recently preached on Jesus' claim to be the light of the world. Here in the 18th century is a philosophical movement that makes a competing claim to be light to the world. And it's helpful to know about this, be aware of it. I'm going to describe the Enlightenment in 3 bullets, which is grossly simplifying the Enlightenment, but it'll at least give us an overview. We could spend college courses studying the Enlightenment. But Enlightenment thought emphasized elevation of human reason, demotion of religion to the status of myth and superstition. I think that's a fair description. And along with that, rejection of prior sources of authority. And there were many prior sources of authority. The most important for us are the Bible, God, the existence of God, the church. And we have to remember the Catholic Church had wielded a huge institutional power over medieval Europe, unlike we have here in the United States with separation of church and state. So the authority of the church in past centuries was a powerful presence. Other sources of authority were, of course, the philosophies of Aristotle, the Greek philosopher. In that, Aristotle was very influential in universities and in thought of the day. And so throwing off, rejecting prior sources of authority include both religious authority and philosophers from the ancient past, Plato, Aristotle, others. Okay, so this was an important change of thought, the Enlightenment, that occurred in the 18th century. And it's important to us because Enlightenment thought had been in the 18th century the domain of a pretty small circle of philosophers, thinkers, writers. But during the 19th century, Enlightenment thinking spread steadily into the broader cultural mindset. Okay, it became mainstream in this next century. C.S. Lewis, author we all know about, 20th century thinker and writer, he refers to this period of time as being the unchristening of Western thought. Interesting phrase. Lewis also uses the term post-Christian to describe his own era. And I think what he's getting at is that around 1800, the beginning of the 19th century, the West was becoming more secular. It was, what does secular mean? Secular is a culture, a mindset without reference to religion or spirituality. And C.S. Lewis is a pretty clear thinker, including about the past and the historical trends of the past. So in his mind, this 19th century was a period of the unchristening. This is when Western culture became post-Christian, as it were. Well, this is all important context for archaeology. In fact, I've noted the date, 1824, because in that year, the word archaeology appears in the Oxford English Dictionary for the very first time. Now that's a landmark of sorts. It's a clear sign that archaeology was coming into its own. It was being recognized as a unique field of study within science. And coincidentally, as I've already noted, this is also the decade that archaeology gets underway in the ancient Near East. So there's our 3-century sort of introduction. It's obviously been brief. I apologize for that, but it does give us a little context for the early 19th century. Both archaeology and biblical archaeology begin here. And this is an era of rising secularism. And in the context of that rising secularism, biblical archaeology has repeatedly surprised skeptics by confirming the historical reliability of the Bible. And given the context I just described, there was a rising skepticism about the Bible as history, both because the Bible was now being rejected. I'm speaking of the early 19th century. The Bible was being disregarded as not as history. It was thought of as myth and superstition. But furthermore, in the early 19th century, Bible skeptics had very specific reasons to question the historical reliability of the Bible, because existing historical records at the time seemed to show that the Bible was clearly in error about some historical events. And I'd like to highlight 5 of those causes for skepticism and how the skeptics got surprised by the findings of archaeology. So here's our first surprise. So there was definitely a difference of agreement here. And on the left is just a brief statement of the biblical detail. A people called the Hittites are mentioned dozens of times in the Old Testament, beginning as early as Genesis chapter 10. I'm sure you all remember Uriah the Hittite in David's army. Pretty prominent use of the word Hittite. And there's some 4 dozen other mentions of Hittites. But on the secular side, secular historians were no longer considering the Bible history. So from extra biblical sources, the Hittites, there was nothing known about Hittites as of 1800. There was not a single thing, no artifacts, no written history. There was no way to establish the Hittites existed apart from the Bible. And many historians considered Hittites a mythical people, a figment of biblical imagination. And then the surprise occurred right here. In the year 1906, archaeologists began to uncover artifacts in ruins of an ancient Bronze Age Hittite empire, which we now know was between 1600 and 1200 BC. This initial dig was near Ankara, Turkey, current day capital of Turkey. And the artifact I've chosen is on page 4. It's called the Treaty of Aleppo. Now, with regard to the Hittites, they have dug up whole cities with city walls and palaces and temples. They've dug up hundreds of artifacts and numerous clay tablets. And I've just chosen one called the Treaty of Aleppo. This is thought to be one of the earliest written treaties that survives to our day, which makes it kind of an interesting artifact. So here we have proof emerging from archaeology in the first decade of the 20th century. Yes, Hittites did exist. Turns out the Bible was correct. So, and as I said, this is page 4 in your handout. Let's move on to the second surprise. So in Isaiah chapter 20, verse 1, there's a passing reference to a king Sargon of Assyria. Well, that's a dilemma because in the early 19th century, there was no historical evidence of any Assyrian king with that name. So there was nothing outside the Bible. And then the surprise came along in 1843, the ruins of Sargon's palace at a location called Khorsabad were discovered near modern-day Mosul, Iraq, in Mesopotamia. And this discovery is page 11 in your handout, and it's basically the remnants of a palace and a city that has been clearly identified as being the capital city and the home of a King Sargon of Assyria. And so once again, out of the ground, out of the sands of Mesopotamia, emerges a real surprise. There really was a King Sargon. Pretty fun. Let's move to surprise number 3. Surprise number 3, the dilemma begins in Daniel, book of Daniel, chapter 5. It says, a man named Belteshazzar was king of Babylon when the city of Babylon fell to invading Persians. Well, this was problematic to the Bible skeptics, and but in a more significant way than our first 2 surprises. That's because the available history of the time, early 19th century, clearly showed that the last king of Babylon was named Nabonidus. So in this case, we have a direct contradiction. There were historical records telling us Nabonidus was the name of the last king, but Daniel used the name Belteshazzar. So what's going on here? Is Daniel just mythology? Well, in 1854, the surprise emerged called the Nabonidus cylinder, shown in this picture. And this cylinder names Belteshazzar as Nabonidus' son. And other archaeological records tell us that Nabonidus had lived in an Arabian desert town for a decade, and he left his son, the crown prince, as ruler in Babylon. There's some speculation that Nabonidus may have gone to the desert on a mystical or religious pilgrimage of some kind. We don't know for sure, but we do know for sure that Nabonidus left his son, the crown prince, as co-regent, and he was in charge of Babylon when the Persians arrived and conquered. This discovery was made near Basra, Iraq. It's page 16 of your handout. So here we have a situation. We had a direct conflict between the biblical record and the archaeological record, and it turns out both were right. A completely different kind of surprise, I think. Pretty fun. I'll move ahead. Surprise number 4. So in the Bible, we have quite a bit about a Persian king named Cyrus. And in particular, Cyrus' benevolent treatment of the Jews in exile in Babylon is described in detail by Ezra. So as you can guess, this is events that are happening right after the Persians conquer Babylon and unseat Belteshazzar. The question is, the Jews are in exile in Babylon. They've been treated one way by the Babylonians. How is this new empire going to treat the Jewish exiles? Turns out in a very benevolent way. And the skeptics scoffed at the idea of a benevolent king in the ancient Near East who promoted religious liberty. And this is a fair criticism because we know a lot about the ancient empires, Assyrians, Hittites, Egyptians. We know that these superpowers of the ancient world, when they conquered another people, they tended to treat those conquered peoples in a way that benefited themselves. They weren't necessarily lenient and benevolent toward these conquered peoples. So there was some reason for skepticism that Ezra should be so complimentary of King Cyrus. until 1879, when this clay cylinder you see in the picture, the Cyrus cylinder, was discovered, describing Cyrus's policies in this new Persian Empire that included repatriation of displaced peoples and restoration of local religious practices. And the policies described on this cylinder don't name the Jews or Jerusalem specifically, but they very specifically describe the experience of the Jewish people, where they were allowed to leave Babylon, return to Jerusalem, rebuild their temple, and worship their own God, Yahweh. This cylinder was discovered near Baghdad, Iraq, and it's page 17 in your handout. And it's true that Persia was an anomaly among the ancient empires in being so benevolent and tolerant of diverse religious practices. They were truly unique. All right, that's number 4. And then we'll finish here with surprise number 5. Surprise number 5 begins, we're now in New Testament era. We're going to Acts 17, where Luke is recording the missionary journeys of Paul and recounting experiences of some of his followers. The early Christians in Thessalonica, Greece, got into trouble and were hauled before the city officials, who in Acts 17 are named polytarchs. Okay, that's no big deal, except that that's a strange word. The word polytarch was unknown prior to 1800. The word polytarch was unknown in any Greek literature outside of the Bible. And we have, obviously, Greek is still spoken today. We have an abundance of ancient Greek literature from the past. Nowhere except Acts 17 do you find a Greek word polytarch until 1835, when the word polytarch was found on a AD 2nd century inscription in Thessalonica, proving that Luke was reliable after all. It's this stone inscription. In fact, the first one was found in 1835. Later, a second nearly identical stone was found. So we have 2 of these. This surprise is page 24 in your handout. So for some reason, the city of Thessalonica, they had an office, as it were, polytarch, and those were the rulers of the city. That's pretty fun. This is one of the reasons that Luke, unlike 1800, where there was some skepticism about Luke, this is one of the reasons Luke is considered a very detailed and accurate recorder of history. All right, so lots of surprises. I'm going to wrap up our morning with this slide. I've tried to define for us what archaeology is and when biblical archaeology emerged, how it emerged in an era of skepticism. And my first thought is that we 21st century Christians live in a really unique era in which a still increasing collection of artifacts continues to confirm the historical reliability of the Bible. I could say this, we Christians are in an era of biblical archaeology, not to be overly dramatic, but Christianity has been around 2,000 years, and it's just the last 200 where we've had this collection of physical objects from the past that 100% confirm the historical reliability of the Bible. The second bullet points out the important limitation that it's a limited set of objects. And that's to be expected given Yamachi's rule of the fractions. But they leave us with increased confidence built upon Gluick's two answers. The fact that no artifact that we have found so far contradicts the Bible, and those that have found that have relevance to the Bible, they confirm the historical events, places, and persons in the Bible. That is very cool. All right. Well, there's my overview. I've taken up most of an hour. Any thoughts or questions here as we wrap up? I'll go back to this view of the screen. What do you think? What was new to you or surprising to you out of this summary?
All of it.
Good answer.
Well, good.
Was Gluick a believer in Christ?
No, he was a Jewish rabbi.
Okay. All right.
Jewish
when he was-
rabbi and president, I think, of some Jewish higher education institution in New York City.
Okay. Another question I was thinking of. I probably should know the answer to this. Was the Enlightenment, Age of Enlightenment, is that also called the Renaissance, or is that two different things?
Those are two different things.
Okay.
Good question, though. The Renaissance was a few centuries earlier, maybe
Oh, okay.
1400s, 1500s.
Yeah.
That was the age of Leonardo and those guys. But yeah, the Renaissance came earlier.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to sort out all those different eras and what did they really mean? What happened? What was different in each of those? It's hard to sort them all out. But we got to start this morning anyway.
I didn't realize how anti-God started back so far. What was that, the 1800s, when the Age of Enlightenment?
Yes.
That was surprising.
Yeah, it to some extent, the Enlightenment was Mike mentioned the Renaissance. The Renaissance embraced humanism, the ability for us to rely on human wisdom, but there was still a pretty strong spiritual overlay. Belief in God was still prominent in the Renaissance. The Enlightenment was kind of the first time that philosophers began to say, we're going to strike off on our own without God. And furthermore, God is myth and superstition. So yes, Debbie, that does come from the 18th century, and it goes mainstream starting in the 19th century and all the more influential in the 20th century. Here in the 21st century, we're in not just a post-God era, but a post-truth era. But that's a much longer conversation as well. C.S. Lewis has just this fascinating paper. The address he gave when he arrived at Cambridge University as a full professor in the 1950s. And it's basically called The Description of the Times. And he thinks that Western civilization entered a significant new era about 1800. And he calls it the unchristening of the West. And there are other factors too. This is, but for our purposes, that's where secularism really begins to expand and grow. Donna is still studying and taking notes and working.
Oh, yeah, I'm trying to get it all in. I'm going to have to go back over this and reread all of these little things here and figure out, now that's right. You know, I'm just amazed at, you know, how archaeology has grown, even in my lifetime. You know,
Yeah.
I studied anthropology and I had a little bit of archaeology in college, but there was so much that wasn't discovered at that time. And so there were a lot of skeptics, and there still are, and they'll say, well, the Bible can't be true because of this. And then you find out, well, yeah, it can be true. You know, we have to take so much of this on faith that what God said was God saying it, and not believe in what the archaeologists haven't found yet. Because
Right.
I do believe that we put way too much emphasis on disproving the Bible than we do on proving the Bible.
It's true, the skeptics want to focus on what hasn't been found, or an unfair assumption that there should be proof. And that distracts from the fact that the existing evidence is highly affirming of the Bible in its historical aspects. One of the difficulties, of course, in the Bible is that we have supernatural events, miracles reported. And that's a separate discussion, separate problem. I think it's helpful to realize that archaeology is going to address the historical events and physical times, places, and people. And within that scope, it's a really sound and compelling witness, I think.
I've been watching on I get these things from my from my email on the patterns of evidence. And this guy, Thomas, I can't remember his name right now, but he goes in and discovers and searches archaeological findings to prove, well, one of them was that the timeline was off as far as when the Egyptian king that was in Moses's time lived. They have found out that they're about 100 years off. And the other one that he's been doing is going and looking for all of the remnants and stuff in the crossing of the Red Sea, and what proofs there were. They're finding wheels from chariots. They're finding metal from armor. They're finding all of this kind of stuff, but yet the Bible will say, well, they didn't cross the Red Sea at this point. I mean, the Bible will say they crossed the Red Sea, but people will say they can't cross the Red Sea at that point. There was no way it could possibly have happened. And yet now they're finding this out. So I find that God has hidden so many secrets from us because I think he wants us to believe what he says first, not to have everything proven. Just sort of like the Pharisees wanted to have proof that Jesus was who he said he was. And you don't always have to have proof. You have to believe that he is who he is.
I agree. We have to believe, but it's also true that the biblical record gives us reasons to believe. And John the Baptist gave reasons why people should believe him. Jesus gave reasons why people should believe him. So expecting proof, I think, is the wrong expectation, but there are really compelling reasons.
Mhm.
Dee, what do you think?
Well, I find it all very fascinating. I've been watching a lot of different things too, and it's 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 been interesting. I was thinking about that whole thing with Galileo, and of course the big thing with the church at that point in time in the early 1800s is they believed that the flood was at a specific point in history, and all of the hieroglyphics and the pyramids and the Egyptian information they were discovering disproved all that, so the church was really having a hard time. So I think it's fascinating to find out that we need to be careful how well, it's just interesting to see how God has, his timing is so different than our timing. I think
Yeah.
that's
Sure.
the best way to,
Exactly.
is that, the way he shows time is different than ours. And the church needs to be aware of that. And the church really found out they had to be aware of that back in the 1800s.
Mm.
Yeah, there are some difficult points in history that are fascinating to look back on and to think about, no question.
But I think it gives us hope, and it gives us faith and trust in what we believe in, what the Bible presents to us. So I think there's a great deal of hope there.
It's like you can say, I believe the Bible, and you believe the Bible and you trust in what God has said. Then all of a sudden, one of these things that comes up and proves the Bible, you go, yay, God!
Yeah. Yeah, I'm there. I think the reasons to believe that Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago was who he said he was. I
Mhm.
think they're very compelling. They're better than the reasons to disbelieve. I think
Right.
a science like archaeology, it can reflect on the historical reliability of the Bible. It's a very strong support for that. And talking about proof, that's for another time, but that's interesting question. I don't think God intended to give us proof, but that's a different lecture.
But I love it when it does come out that way.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we can call this proof. I think we can call this evidence.
Evidence, yes, it is
Evidence,
evidence.
reasons, but this is not irrefutable proof. This is not no one's going to take this handout and say, Christianity is it. This is the proof. No, I don't go that far. And
No.
I don't even think we should expect that. But those are deeper philosophical questions. I'll just stick with the archaeology for today. All right. Well, we've spent a whole hour. It's after 10. So to avoid Zoom fatigue, I'm not going to go any further, but we can visit here as long as people want. So glad the swingers joined us. Good to see you, Mike and Debbie.
But yeah, thanks for letting us know about it so we can be part of it.
Well, thanks for the book. I have found it to be it's dense and deep. I haven't read it, but I have used it a lot, and it's been a really helpful reference. I appreciate it.
Wonderful.
So are you the other two ladies are from out there from Denver area?
Yes.
I live in Arvada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you all go to church together?
Yeah, we were. Now we're Zooming together.
Yeah. Still some togetherness there.
It's a new process these days, Zooming. Everybody's Zooming.
But Deb, you're right. We all attend, or pre-pandemic, we all attended church together at Applewood,
Yes.
and we're
Okay.
glad to have you join us from Florida today.
Yeah, next time we'll be back in Michigan. We're heading back up Saturday.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, that was a nice reprieve from the
Oh.
cold Michigan. Nice.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna go hang out at the pool this afternoon.
Good.
It's hard.
Perfect.
Yeah, so hard.
I'm glad you got some sun and some warm weather. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ellen and I were hoping to take a vacation in Southern California on the ocean in
Oh,
mid-February, but right now we're not planning to go to California. The pandemic is just too
Oh, it's
out there,
terrible.
and non-essential travel is basically prohibited. So
I'm looking forward to getting my vaccination, just so that I have that freedom that I could probably get on a plane without feeling like I'm going to get something. Um, and to be able to go back up to see my sister and to go visit my friend in Arizona and get some warm weather and those kinds of things, because it is hard. It's hard being cold all the time.
I don't know if all of you are aware, but Ellen and I both tested positive for COVID back on December 12th. And we rode out pretty mild illness for what, 2-3 weeks in December. And we are very thankful to be on the far side.
Yes.
Well,
yeah.
Mike did the same thing. Yeah.
Yep. I was in November. Yeah.
Okay.
And I never got it, but I have O positive blood. And I've heard that O positive blood, you're more resistant to it.
Ah,
Oh, I'm
Good.
O positive.
Oh, there you go. Yay.
But I'm not going to say that I'm more resistant. I just take very good care at wearing my mask and only going out and not being in crowds and spending a lot of time outside as much as I can with the cold.
yeah.
I am O positive, and I had a medium.
And you had it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Symptoms weren't bad, but it was just a case of the flu, a cold.
Did you lose your taste?
I did not, but Ellen did, big time.
Oh,
Oh,
Ellen, did
It's
it take you very much?
back.
Oh,
It's
okay.
back.
Yeah.
Ellen losing her taste was the sign that we needed to go get tested. And
So you had it at the same time?
yeah, we tested the same day.
Hmm. I probably had it first and gave it to Jim.
Now, are you guys going to have vaccinations as well?
Yes. Hmm. That's recommended.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and get that too.
Yeah.
How about your daughter and her husband? Did they have COVID?
No,
They're still clear so far.
no. They're really careful. You know, they hang out with Tom's family. But they're all pretty, that's kind of their pod, as we say. So Kara has been teaching a few Pure Barre classes, exercise classes, but it's a very small group. So far, so good.
Yeah.
And Tom goes, they go back and forth, meeting a little bit in person, and then they have to back off and that kind of thing in the church. So it's they have to be pretty flexible.
Well, as I say, when I get my vaccination, then I'll have that opportunity again, because I certainly do miss my church family.
Yeah, we've been going in person since a couple weeks ago. So it's been really good. You know how
Oh.
much you miss it. It's
Yeah.
Yeah.
not bad at home, but it was fun to go and just be with everybody, and the singing and the worship together. This is way better.
It's not
Yeah.
quite the same singing by yourself.
No.
Very true.
It isn't. But
Yeah.
I am so grateful that we have Zoom, that I can experience worship with others in a way that I would not be able to do had we not had Zoom. I mean, this would have been a terrible experience for me had I been eliminated from going and having worship with my church family and being able to connect with other people visually, even though we can't, and we have to do it virtually, but it really has kind of saved me. It's kept me into kind of the social realm. And my son was talking about not wanting to be on Facebook anymore. And I says, I thought about that too. But Facebook is a way for me to connect with my family, my cousins, and people my friends that I know. So that has been a real blessing for me to be able to find out what other people are doing. However, it can have its drawbacks also with negative implications. But I'm very grateful to God for bringing technology to us before this happened.
Boy, no doubt the fact that this pandemic happened during the internet age, it
Yes.
really changed our experience of it.
Yeah. Right. Well, I better go. I have a meetup with some friends to walk. So good to see you guys.
Good to see you. See you next
Yes.
week.
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
I'll be here.
Swingers,
Everybody have a great day.
great to see you.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Bye-bye.
all.